Welcome to another episode of Make Calcutta Relevant Again. I'm your host, Sumit Agarwal, the DEI ambassador and the LinkedIn top voice for DEI. Today, Make Calcutta Relevant Again presents Heroes of Diversity, where we celebrate the diverse voices changing India and ushering in a new Bharat. Today, my guest is Indrani Basu, who is a parent of two adults with autism and the founder director of Autism Society, West Bengal. Welcome, Indrani ji.
Thank you, Sumit.
So, Indrani ji, you have been a change maker when it comes to the field of autism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me something. How did the journey start, and what was your reaction when you found out that you are a parent to people with autism, right? Because that time there was no information
No.
and there was no talk of autism.
No.
So, how did you discover?
Well, it was many years ago, so it was something like 94, 5, 6. At that time, I realized that, both my sons were very different from other children. Both of them had speech, strangely enough, because at that time, I didn't know that people with autism might not be speakers. I was a bit surprised about that. So both of them spoke, but I could see there was differences in so many ways. There were differences in the way they talked and what they talked about. There was a difference in the way they played. Both of them, the way they played games, how they interacted with the other children, how they interacted with the rest of the family. There was a big change. How they responded generally. So I was going to various experts. So because, when you think about behaviors and language, you tend to go to people like, first of all, you go to ENT specialists, and then you go to psychologists and psychiatrists. At that time, nobody really diagnosed autism. So I didn't get any kind of diagnosis. Somebody said schizophrenia. Somebody said, oh, he's a slow learner. So it varied. Finally, we did get a diagnosis. And when they said autism, I really didn't know much about it, but I had learned of the term. I read it somewhere. So I had some idea that, okay, this is something to do with the brain. That's all I knew. So it was but at that time, I was young, my husband was young, and we thought, okay, if there must be some answer to this. And I think that kind of set me off, because I didn't think, at that time there was not so much of acceptance, but more of like, I've got to deal with it. This must be fixed. This must be made, this has to be okay at the end. That they will be okay at the end. They'll be like other people. So you start off like that.
So, did it come off as a shock, or what was your initial reaction?
Initially, it was a big shock, because I remember when the doctors were explaining it to me, and they were doing it very nicely, but they were being very truthful. They were saying that this is not something like they will. It's like, even with the best of training and the best of teaching and therapy, people will notice the difference in your sons. They won't be like other people. And they may need support for the rest of their life. Now, that time, that didn't really hit home. That didn't hit home. It was more like, okay, they've got this thing called autism. Something must be done about it. It was more like that. We've got to do something about it. So it started like that. But slowly, of course, my mind changed.
So, from a parent to an activist to a change maker and being a voice yourself, how did the journey of Autism Society West Bengal start?
Okay, after the initial diagnosis, they did refer us, these doctors, to various places in Calcutta, which really had no idea about autism. And because by that time I started reading, that's all I read. Going bedtime, I was reading books on autism. And there was not much available in India. So it was friends, relatives, who who learned about this condition, and they would send me books by post, because at that time we didn't have internet. So I used to get lots of books on autism. So I started attending workshops, whatever I could, attend, whatever little that was going on. And I was reading really my waking hours. And wherever I was referred to, I realized that there was a gap. They didn't really understand. They had this concept of what they called a slow learner, whatever that means. There's no such thing as a slow learner. So I found it wasn't helping them. And they were not getting the kind of support and teaching that they needed. So at that time, I started something on my own, which was basically more like a parent support group, like a play group, and where my sons and other children like them could meet, and we could organize games, and the parents could meet, sort of share, and sort of give each other mutual support. So that's why. But at that time, we didn't register as an organization. We just came together once a week, not even once a week, like every 2 weeks, and kind of started off from there into a sort of like a play group, but with children of different ages. There were no adults there. All the kids were quite young, but it started off like that.
So, you have a lot of global exposure because you have corresponded with a lot of people outside India as well. But when it comes to India, a lot of these therapies are outdated. And when it comes to outside India, say Europe or US for that matter, they are much more advanced than us in these models as behavioral therapies and other things are concerned.
Yeah, I don't know if they're more advanced. What I've noticed is the attitude of the therapist may be a
Okay.
little bit different. Whereas in India, it's very clinical, and you often find that the person with autism is sitting there, and the therapist is talking over them, to the parents, and they're not part of it. They're given the therapy, but they're not consulted. Right? In some therapies, the therapists have to hold the child and physically handle, like they're not consulted, or they're not included. That difference I find there in between the therapist attitude in maybe abroad, and not in all countries, by the way, some countries, and those in India. But on the whole, therapies in India have, especially occupational therapy, has really improved. Not so much, I think, speech and language. That still needs a little bit of catching up to do. And even behavioral intervention. I think ABA is better understood than when I first got into the field, when ABA was totally, it was in the name of ABA, a lot of things were done wrong. Now it's a bit better. But still, I feel that connection, that therapists have to connect with the person with autism, even if that person is not speaking and not looking as a person. Then you are a more effective therapist. That's something I think in India, in our country, we need to come up on.
For the interest of the audience, can you please elaborate or explain in one or two lines what is AB and how does it help people with autism? What are
Well,
behavioral
yeah.
therapies?
ABA is based on the ABC principles of behavior. So, it started with Lovaas, and then various people it took on, and they developed it further. So, lots of renowned people involved. Uh, Basically, it came up with a program where I used those principles of changing a behavior, depending on where, what idea is that behavior changes depending on what happens after the behavior. If the behavior is what in very plain language is called rewarded, exact meaning what that person wanted happened, then that behavior has been rewarded, then that behavior will stay, or it may develop further. But if what that behavior wanted didn't happen, or something else happened that the person doesn't want, then that behavior will go down. That's the very, very basic principle. But I've got to say this, that it's not the only approach. For some children with autism, ABA has not worked. and for others it has. ABA on the whole does work. It works very well with young children in developing all kinds of skills. I prefer to see ABA as a skill builder rather than dealing with behaviors, unwanted behaviors. I think if you develop skills, it's so difficult. I know when you look at individuals with autism, they look physically okay, but they very often can't do the simplest of things. Like closing a bottle. And you think, well, you got your 10 fingers and all that, why can't you close a bottle? But that coordination sometimes for them is so difficult. The sensory motor issues are so overwhelming. The simplest of things that they can't do. I'll give an example like tying a knot. He can do so many things on the computers and so on, but simple thing is like tying a knot, he can't do. So there's a lot of challenges for them. So, like a very, very brilliant gentleman who is doing his PhD said, I do the most amazing mathematics, for my research. But when I go to the shops, I can't do the day-to-day calculation. So it's a very complex disorder. So I think therapists have to understand that ABA does a lot in developing skills, especially in young children. But I think people have to know when to leave ABA and move on. And they have to know that you cannot use ABA just to stop behaviors. You need to develop skills. The more skilled a person becomes, the behaviors will just go by itself.
As you said, skills are very important, and we live in a skill-based economy these days. Inclusive Bharat, inclusive India, and new skills are coming in, right? And when I talk about skills, one of the main things it comes from is education. And you have been a very vocal person for inclusive education. But most of the time I hear from institutions, mainstream schools, mainstream colleges, that, Sumit, if we hire too many special educators and include them in one class, that hampers the pace of the class, because we are time bound by universities to complete a certain section of the syllabus within a certain time, because we have to conduct exams. So what can be done at that point?
Yeah. See, inclusion means you do not use anything like economic status, ethnicity, religious background, and their physical or mental condition as a barrier to, or accessibility, barrier to access to education. But I think what people don't understand, it's not a question of putting a person who might need support in certain areas in a classroom without support. You cannot be inclusive unless you are prepared to give support. Now, if you say, well, I'm not going to give support. I think what is so sad, is there are some schools which take extra fees to accommodate special needs children, but that support is not there. That, to me, I find very sad. And I think a lot of parents are very innovative. A lot of parents are willing to go that extra mile, even if they can't pay the money. I'm talking about the middle-of-the-road schools. I'm talking about government schools. By the way, technically, all these schools are supposed to be inclusive. So if you ask parents, and we still have a lot of stay-at-home moms, we still have, who are willing to give time, or willing to find somebody who will give time. So if that kind of support system, if schools can get together with parents and maybe organizations and find a way of providing that support system. And lot of the issues about pace, well, first of all, the regular pace of the class, the way our curriculum is, even for regular children, it's just a question of mugging up and finishing. True learning is not happening. I think including people with disability will make our education system examine itself. And maybe if we truly examine itself and not run the education system as a system where we're just cramming information, but truly educating and truly helping young people to be learners on their own, to be problem solvers, it will be better for everyone. Not even in the non-disabled world, the neurotypical people. There are many who struggled in schools because the education system does not encourage creativity, does not encourage out of the box thinking. Lot of people actually develop once they leave schools, or they get into college, or they leave the education system and get into work. That's when they start developing. So I wish that the powers that be would not be so scared at examining the education system and look at its curriculum, because the assumption that those with disability have nothing, because that's what it is, that those with disability have nothing to contribute, have nothing to give. But if you look at the history, and especially if you look at the history of technology, there's a lot of people who are on the spectrum who have contributed to the recent this suddenly burst of technology. Um, so it will be a great loss of great minds if we do not think of a more inclusive way of teaching, not just in school, but in higher education, which I think at the moment is really lacking, because there's a belief that how can a person have a disability if they go to college, right? Especially something like autism. How can that be? When abroad you have people with autism going to college, finishing their higher education, people with Down syndrome, people with various kind of intellectual disability going to college. I think there's a big gap in the understanding of our policymakers between what disability is. Disability is like autism, and what learning is, and what education is. And I think if some way those gaps are filled, we would have a more inclusive system.
You have, sort of dealt with a lot of people in the foreign environments as well as Indian environments. Where do you think India stands in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because you have been a part of a lot of government committees as well.
I think where it stands is that um, it's not as it's the access that I think families want. When people realize that when a family realizes they have a child with disability, any disability, the access to support, access to service is not nearly enough distributed evenly. I do agree that even if you go to countries like the US or somewhere in Europe, it's not the same everywhere. But initially, the basic support is available for everyone, where irrespective of where you live, maybe it may not be walking distance, but it is available, like within a reachable way. In India, that still hasn't happened. That I could be living somewhere outside Calcutta, and I suddenly, maybe I live places like, let's say, Mednipur, Digha. I'm just mentioning that. And you suddenly discover that you have a child with autism. I should be able to access good therapy, support. Someone who knows about autism can explain what the future will be. I can access that, and that is not happening. Or if I live somewhere else in part of the world where it's not an urban area, it's not one of those metro cities, that I should be able to get help. That is not happening. That, I think, is the biggest thing. And second, of course, is inclusion is not as much as we want. You know what inclusion is in India? It depends who's the principal. If the principal of the school has this, believes in inclusion, and
Empathy.
then he'll go, or she will go all out for it. But day that person retires, or that principal changes, the whole scenario changes in the school. And that is very, very, very sad, really. It's not, there are laws, but those laws have not turned into policies which have been implemented.
Because I have heard that in UK, the government pays for your translator if you have a hearing difficulty. But in Indian, I don't see government paying for your therapies.
No, they don't. They don't pay you for your Yes, they do. I mean, if you go to some government places, you can get free access to different kinds of therapies. But unfortunately, that it may not be, the duration may not be sufficient. The quality may not be the quality may not be same. What I mean by it depends who your therapist is. With some therapists, it'll be very good. But then the minute your therapist changes, you will not get the same. That quality is not maintained across professionals, and sometimes these places are so far away. These government places that parents have to travel a couple of hours to get to like a 30-minute therapy. So I wish it was more available. I think it can be done, but at the same time, also there's another problem: is not enough people coming into this field of disability professionals. I think that is another issue also.
So, coming from that issue, because a lot of professionals keep saying that they don't get paid enough to come into this field, that's why there's a dearth of professionals, right? So, what do you think can be done to fix this entire scenario?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true, but I think like all profession, initially the pay is very low, but as you become more experienced, you can be earning very well. But to remove, I think what has happened is that if we want this profession to grow, then it kind of needs nurturing. That is, governments have to come up with funds. The CSR funds have to go to organizations that are providing the therapies. It has to reach those places, and then the pay will be good. Parents who can afford it, they will pay a lot of money for good therapists, but some parents can't. And here, I think the government has a role. I think the corporates have a role, and because more the earlier the intervention starts, less these individuals will have problems in adult life, and many of them will become, even if they don't become totally independent, but at least they will not be as dependent as they would be if they didn't get the help at the right time.
And as you said, they should learn to be more independent. A lot of people don't even want to disclose if they have neurodiversity at the workplace, so that becomes a major issue. But when I look at different other countries, the hesitation is slightly less.
That is absolutely true. This gentleman who came recently, I told you, he had autism, and he came and he said, first thing he said is that I have autism. It was very clear from the way he talked and everything. We immediately understood. Then he said, did you realize I have autism? I said, yes, I did realize you have autism. So he said, yeah, like I'm comfortable with it. The reason why that stigma is still there, very often people with autism, when they're children, they hear very negative things said about them and about their condition, and they don't like people to mention the word autism, and they've grown up thinking autism is a bad thing, so they don't like to talk about it. They don't even like to be identified as being autistic or neurodivergent or whatever. And it's sad, because I think once you kind of come to terms with it, you really begin to deal with a lot of challenges in a much easier way. If you say, okay, these are my challenges, these are the areas I need support, and I'm going to need support, and then you become more kind of able to do with it. The biggest problem I think with autism is that it's not a visible disability. It's an invisible disability. The expectation of everyone is, why can't he do that? I've seen parents do that. Why are you looking like that? Why are you walking? Why aren't you sitting down? Constant about everything that person does. There's a criticism because it's not fitting in with what's called socially norm, so with the social norm. And I think that causes more and more stress and a negative view of oneself, and that's why they don't like to disclose, even though those who know autism will look at that person and say, oh, this person has autism.
The stats was 1 in 100 for people with autism. Now it's 1 in 36 They're saying in some studies. We know that we do not have a particular cause of autism. It has been attributed to genetics and environmental factors, but the cause has never been able to be pinpointed. But what do you think is the sudden reason for rise in the numbers?
Yeah, I talked to various people on this field, in this field, about this, and what many of them said is that it's not rising; it's just that they're being identified more, especially the people with milder autism. Earlier, when we lived in a much more um, smaller social world, maybe in a village, or we had a sort of like an extended family, or we traveled less. So there was the family support was quite strong. The social support was quite strong. So people who are on the milder end of the spectrum, they managed. And second thing that happened was, like earlier, you took on the job. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but that was fact. Whatever your father was, you became. So if your father was a shopkeeper, you'll become a shopkeeper. Your father was a fisherman, you become a fisherman. If your father was a teacher, you become that. So you had this kind of lifetime to learn a trade. So people who are kind of what people say moderate to mild autism, they had all this time to learn a way of life and a way of living and earning. So that helped them to kind of blend in. And because the social world was very structured, so and so is in charge of the family, his word is law. Everything was very structured. It doesn't matter at what socio-economic strata you were at. Now that has broken down. So these people with the kind of milder autism are lost. They're living in families which are very small, nuclear families. That social support system is not there. Many of them are now suffering from various kind of mental illness, and that has now become this huge issue, especially with the autistic group, of different levels. But when they become adults, they are experiencing a lot of mental health issues, and that is because the social structure, the social support has gone. You are looking for it in an institution. If you look at playing, I don't know about you, you're too young, but when I was young, we played outside. We went out to play, and our parents didn't even know where we were until we came back, you know, because we had to come back and sit down and study. All right. So that kind of playing has gone. Nobody plays like that anymore. And I tell parents, I mean, basically, all that therapy you're doing, that was available in society. It was available when kids went out to play. Yeah, that's where your occupational therapist was. That's your OT was. That's your ABA therapist was. Your elder cousins and younger siblings, or your neighborhood friends. And now you're having to do it in a clinical setup. That's the difference. So it has a lot to do with how we've changed the structure of our life. That you are getting more and more people identified as having autism or similar kind of condition, not just autism, ADHD, other various kinds of conditions are coming up. That is because we have the huge change in the way we live.
So, as you said, the social support is not there. Now, people look at people with autism as a medical model rather than a social model, right? They need to be cured. So, what is your view on that? And how do parents deal with the fact that what happens after us? A lot of people, you are a parent yourself, a lot of people keep thinking what happens after us. I have cerebral palsy. My mother's 70, my dad is 82. And they also keep thinking what after us because I'm not getting married. That's a personal choice. But I don't have any relatives who will support me after that. So that is somewhere, what's your view on that?
Yeah, you see, medical model is we're not supposed to be having a medical model, but it's still there. It's still there. I mean, people still, I mean, even when I meet new families, they come and the child has been diagnosed, and then you say, okay, they give the papers, and I see number of doctors, like they've gone through all the psychiatrists, psychologists that there are in Calcutta. It's because they're looking for that cure. And it's very difficult to cure autism. I don't think so. Like, I'm Bengali, and I lived a huge part of my life abroad, but I never stopped being a Bengali, right? You can't. You're not a Bengali. You're a Mar-
Alrighty.
Marwari. Even though you've lived in Bengal, but you cannot be cured of being a Marwari. That's who you are. So it's a bit like that. It's a culture. You can't change it. I can I can pretend, or I can not pretend, but I can live in another culture and totally immerse myself. But I can't change who I am. Okay? So I don't think, irrespective of how skilled, and I have met very, very able, very, how shall I say, mildly autistic people, but the autism is still there. Autism is still there. And those who are very comfortable with it, they will talk about it. And I think that makes their life easier and they deal with life better. Regarding what happens after us, and I think this cannot be solved by individual families. I know there are policies, again, there's not enough implementation. What there is are various organizations, especially parent bodies, setting up residential care. But the residential care, I think, is very parent orientated. Like, it's mostly about parents living with their children in a particular space. And where the focus should be, the parents are not there. Now, what are they going to do? Secondly, the residential care that most people are thinking about cannot be the same for everyone. Like what I would like, the support system I would like for my sons, or let's just take one of my sons. Like, let's take my eldest son who can talk and do many things, but can't take major decisions, cannot be the same as for you. You can take a lot many decisions, whereas he can't. He can physically do a lot of things, but he can't make financial decisions. He can't even make health decisions. Like, when do I go to a doctor? He can't decide, do I save this money? Do I spend that money? Whereas you can. So there has to be some flexibility in whatever support system we think of. It has to have that flexibility to understand where and what type of support that individuals with autism will need. And the other factor is that India is getting old. The population is going to get old. We're not going to have very young, like we still are very young.
By 2047, it's going to be
Yeah,
an aging population.
aging population, and people with disability are going to age too. Like one of my sons is already in his middle age, so the usual middle age stuff has come. So that will happen. It'll happen to everyone, and things, I think, becomes more complicated, especially with people with autism, when they become old. I mean, old, really old. But I think what after us, the answer lies very much in acceptance. If society at large is more accepting of differences, and it is happening, it isn't that it isn't happening. Recently we went on a short journey by train, because my sons love train, and my husband and I sometimes get dragged onto trains even if we don't want to. So we didn't get to sit all together because both the sons wanted to sit on the window and we didn't get seats. So 4 of us were sitting in 4 different places. My younger son was happily rocking while he was sitting near the window and watching the world go by. And he was shaking his hand. And I realized that nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody was shocked, surprised, or gave him a sly look and then look at me. So that tells me that maybe acceptance is coming. Maybe. We need a society that is not shocked by differences, that doesn't frown on differences, and doesn't look to make everyone the same. If we can get some of that going, then what after us becomes easy. But definitely, lot of support system have to be created.
So do you think visibility is the key to acceptance?
I think disability and inclusion is a key to not just acceptance, but a sort of like a better way of life for everyone. Because when you are catering to the persons with a disability, unlike the prevailing view that they will slow us down, they'll pull us down, I think what it makes you do, it makes you creative and find better and innovative ways of doing things. So I think, yes, that if we have inclusion and acceptance, life for everyone will get better. For instance, having ramps has helped everyone. It has helped me. Sometimes I don't take the stairs, I take the ramps.
It has helped me as well.
Yes, exactly. So it will affect the quality of life of everyone. It will not slow us down. I think Just because people don't want to do something, they give this excuse like, oh, if we include people with disability, they'll slow us down, they'll make things worse. I don't think so. I think things can become better in whatever sector, like the healthcare system, the education system, everything, everything.
So what do you think is the future of India when it comes to DEI?
Disability.
Yeah, DEI in general and disability.
I think that as more and more people with disability find voices, people like you and from other even people with autism are not speaking up, and not directed by parents. Like we have a social club called YAR, where there's a lot of young people with autism, and they do speak up. Um, it, they mutually support each other. They stand up when someone gets into trouble, and they voice their opinions pretty strongly. I think more and more people with disability, when they start voicing their concern and their need and demanding the rights of their citizenship, and you should be recognized, people with disability should be recognized as change makers, that they can affect who comes into power. And if that happens, I think, yeah, there'll be changes.
But don't you think for that, the numbers of people with disabilities need to reflect its true number? The last survey was done in 2011. After that, 2016, RPWD Act came into power, which recognized 16 disabilities. But 21 disabilities, I'm sorry.
21 disabilities.
And we did not have a census after that.
No.
So
I don't know what's happening with the census. We definitely need a census. You see, for instance, still now a lot of people don't have disability cards. That is one of the reasons I think we should, irrespective of how troubling it is, and maybe you do have to do a bit of running around, we should make sure that they do have their disability card, because that's a proof that lets the government know that when I'm planning policies, I can see a certain amount of citizens who need support. And remember, not everybody needs, and whenever people think of disability and support, they always think of support like, oh God, I got to feed him, bathe him, he doesn't understand anything, I have to do it. It's not like that. It has a wide variation, and that variation has to be there. But I think that's one of the things. And the other thing is that people with disability need to be visible, which I'm very happy they are. If I now go out somewhere, I very often see people with autism, which I didn't, let's say, even 5 years ago. If I go on a holiday, I might see a person with autism.
So the visibility has increased?
Has increased. People with disability are becoming more and more visible. I think young parents don't have that stigma, oh my God, I got to hide my child. They take them out, and very often they speak about it. That is one of the reasons. And secondly, like I said, people with disability have taken matters into their hands, and I hope the autism community will too.
Thank you, Indrani ji, for being a part of Make Calcutta Relevant again and encouraging everybody to find their own voice. I hope all of the parents watching this help their child find their own voice, and don't be shocked when you are diagnosed with autism or your child is diagnosed with autism, because there are a lot of resources available right now, other than, few years back when we had to find it from the scratch.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people are going to learn from this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.